Matthew chapter 2. At last we can return to Matthew's Gospel, having dipped in and around the events that we read of in Luke, because now we have a little bit of the story that is most likely set later on. I'll explain. Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea. Now, we're not told how long after, but we're going to find a clue a little bit later. So after he was born in Bethlehem, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east, wise men, Magi, not kings, by the way, but wise men from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Well, in the east sometimes means where the sun rose, a long way away. These are strange characters, these wise men, aren't they? There might have been something called Zoroastrians, a strange religion from Babylonia. Around about this time, there are still one or two Zoroastrians around today. I'm not sure how wise they are, but they sort of try to predict the future through the moving of the stars. So in some sense, they are astrologers, but perhaps not in the way that we understand astrology today. And they've come from the east. They may have come something like 600 to 800 miles to be in this story. They really have come a long way. What I love about the story of the wise men is that God is speaking to them in their own language. That somehow through their own strange religious ideas, God has still been able to communicate the gospel in a sense to them. I find that an amazing part of God's personality and just a mystery in terms of his methods and ways. Well, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. What new king? So enter the baddie into the Nativity story. And all of Jerusalem with him. And when he had called together all the people, their chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them from where the Christ was to be born. Well, they knew the text in Micah, because they say in Bethlehem in Judea. This is what the prophet has written. And there you can see in verse 6 the quotation from Micah 5 and verse 2. "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Back in the text in Micah 5, it goes on to say, whose origins are from ancient times. Verse 7, "Then Herod called the Magi secretly," strange for a king to do, "and found out from them," now watch this, "the exact time the star had appeared." So he wants to get a bit of the timing right for a very dark and sinister reason, which we'll see. "He sent them to Bethlehem and said, 'Go and make a careful search for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him.'" Well, we know that's not his intention. "After they had heard the king, they went on their way." Now watch this. The star in previous verses had simply appeared in the east in verse 1. We saw his star in the east, verse 2, and have come to worship him. So initially the star was static. It had just appeared in the sky, right? But now it's going to move. So things are changing in the story. When they went on their way, verse 9, the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. So anyway, sorry if it ruins anyone's theories, but this is not a normal astronomical event. This was clearly the work of God. This was clearly a supernatural thing that was happening. So the star moves and stops, just like in the Nativity play. It stops over where Jesus is. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed, verse 10. On coming to the house, now notice, on coming to the house. Now remember we said that it's likely that Mary and Joseph weren't really in an inn, but in a family house. But I'm going to suggest to you that this is a different house again. They saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. This strong language from Matthew, the Jewish writer, who would not easily use the word worship in any context other than the worship of God, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But here, the wise men are seen to worship the child. Well, we understand why. Because he is the Son of God. Indeed, he is God the Son. Now, this isn't clear here in these early chapters of Matthew, but this is, of course, what will come to be understood in Christian theology and in other parts of the New Testament much more clearly. So they worshipped him, and they opened their treasures, and they present him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. If ever you wondered, where does the 3 wise men thing come from? Well, it comes from this, that there are 3 gifts mentioned. It certainly doesn't mean there were only 3 wise men. And here we have gold. Gold, of course, for a king. Incense, which was used in worship. And of myrrh. Myrrh was used for dead bodies. These are 3 very peculiar gifts. But in the words of the Christmas carol, King and God and sacrifice. King, the gold. God, the incense, a symbol of worship. And myrrh, pointing to the death of Jesus. We already said that the angel had announced that Jesus would save his people from their sins. So even at Christmas, Easter is in view. Well, here, the gift of myrrh suggests the death of the cross. This is a baby who has come to die as well as to live. Verse 12, they were warned in a dream. Yet another dream we find here in Matthew's Gospel, similar to the dreams that Joseph was having earlier in chapter 1. To not go back to Herod. They returned to their country by another route. And so here we have, just going a bit further down, the reason why Herod wanted to know, when did the star appear? He gave orders in verse 16 when he realized that the Magi hadn't kept their word to him. He'd been outwitted, the NIV says here. He was furious. He gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. If only those wise men had known that when they said, yeah, we saw that star 2 years ago. Around about 2 years ago, we think. Was it 2? Yeah, it was about 2 years. That would mean the death of infants 2 years and under. Because we are perhaps to think of the Exodus story here, where Pharaoh did something very similar. But it does help us with one thing. It begins chapter 2 and verse 1 after Jesus was born in Bethlehem. How much after? Seems like 2 years after. What, you mean that the Magi and the shepherds didn't bump into each other on their way in and out of a stable? I think so, yes. I think these wise men have arrived 2 years later at least. They saw the star when he was born. It's taken them 2 years to arrive.